Mail order bride rejected for being too freckled. A widowed rancher kissed every freckle. The letter came back unopened. Not mine, hers. I found out about it the way you find out most things in a town like Culver's Bend. Somebody told somebody. And by the time it reached me, I was standing at the feed counter, and Dunk Pruitt had that look on his face, half sorry, half glad he had something worth saying. Harlan Voss sent her back, he said, the bride. I set my hand flat on the counter, just something to press against. Sent her back. Letter to the agency. Said she wasn't what he pictured. Said she had too many spots on her. I picked up my bag of oats, didn't say anything. You know what I mean, freckles. He lowered his voice like it was a condition. Couldn't get past it, I guess. And then Abe Cutter turned her down too, so now she's just sitting over at Mrs. Flood's boarding house. Agency gave her 2 weeks to find a situation or she goes home to Ohio. I walked out. I don't know why it stayed with me. I had my own troubles. 3 years since I buried Clara, a ranch that ran itself if I pushed it hard enough. No particular reason to be sitting that night in the dark of my own kitchen thinking about a woman I'd never laid eyes on, sent back to a boarding house because some man didn't like her face. But I was. Her name was Nora Pell. I knew that from Dunk, who knew it from Mrs. Flood. I didn't ask. He told me anyway because he'd decided I was interested. And Dunk Pruitt is the kind of man who decides things for you and then presents them to you later as if you'd asked. I put it out of my head for a week. Then one morning I was in town to pick up a harness pin from Emmett's, and I came around the side of the livery and she was there, standing at the pump behind the boarding house, filling a bucket. She had her sleeves pushed up and her hair pinned loose, and she was working at that pump handle like she had a schedule to keep, which I later learned she always did, because she was that kind of woman. The freckles, Lord, yes, they were everywhere, across her nose and cheeks and down her forearms and probably everywhere else, small and brown and scattered like seeds thrown from a fist. Harlan Voss had rejected this woman for that, Abe Cutter too. I stood there a moment longer than I should have. She hadn't noticed me. Then she turned and she had. She didn't look embarrassed. That was the first thing. Most women in a strange town rejected twice, waiting out a clock they'd have looked away. She looked right at me with these gray eyes and she said, "If you're going to stare, you may as well introduce yourself." I told her my name. "Harlan Voss is your neighbor," she said. It wasn't a question. "South pasture backs up to his." She went back to the pump. "You don't need a wife. You're here to satisfy your curiosity." "I was here for a harness pin," I said. That got the corner of her mouth, just barely. I don't know how to tell the middle part of this because it didn't happen the way things happen in stories. There was no single moment where the clouds broke and I understood something. It was more like a slow addition. I started finding reasons to be in town. A thing I needed at the dry goods. The mail, which I could have held for a week. Clara's sister always said I was the most obvious man she'd ever met, and I thought she was wrong, but maybe she wasn't. Nora Pell was not soft. That's the thing I'd tell you first if you asked me to describe her. Not soft in the way they mean when they call a woman difficult either. She was direct. She had opinions she'd formed herself, and she stated them plainly, and she didn't go soft at the edges when you pushed. Clara had been gentle, and I'd loved her truly, God knows I had, but Clara would bend herself nearly in half to avoid a disagreement, and sometimes that had its own weight on a man. Nora didn't do that. She told me when I was being a fool, which was more than I'd have liked and exactly what I needed. She was reading 3 books at once, always, one on the nightstand, one in her bag, one apparently committed to memory. She'd grown up on a farm in Licking County. Her father had taught her to figure accounts, which she'd taught herself to do faster than most men could manage. She sewed, badly and without apology. She could bake bread that would hold a nail, and she knew it. "Why'd you come west?" I asked her once. We were sitting on the steps of the boarding house, late afternoon. Mrs. Flood pretending not to watch from the window. I wanted land, she said, or a life near it. Ohio was finished for me. Why? My mother died. My father remarried. His new wife had opinions about space. She looked out at the street. And I'm 31 years old, which in Ohio means the conversation is mostly about what I failed to do by 25. I thought out here might be different. Is it? So far 2 men have sent me back for my face. I didn't know what to say to that. I said, they're idiots. She laughed. It came out of her all at once, like she hadn't expected it, and she pressed her hand over her mouth, and I saw the freckles on the backs of her fingers, and I thought, a man would have to be insane. Genuinely insane. I went to see the agency man, Dobbins, 11 days into the 2 weeks. He had a small office on the 2nd floor of the land title building, and he looked at me the way men look at you when they think they know exactly what you're about. You've come about the Pell woman, he said. I've come to put my name in. He got out his ledger. Age: 44. Widower: 3 years. Property: I told him the acreage. He wrote it. He had this fastidious way of holding the pen, and I remember thinking, this man's never driven a post in his life. Miss Pell has been particular, he said carefully. She has declined introductions with 2 parties. Not the ones who rejected her. He looked up from his ledger. She has herself declined 2 others who approached. Yes, she has standards. Good, I thought, good. He wrote my name in the ledger and sent a note to the boarding house. That afternoon Nora came to the window and looked out at me standing below on the street, and she called down, "You could have just asked me yourself." I wanted to do it right, I said. She looked at me a long moment. Then she said, "Come back at 4." She asked me hard questions. Not the kind that are hard because they're personal, the kind that are hard because she wanted real answers, not the answers a man gives a woman when he's trying to win her. She asked what I expected from a wife. She asked how Clara had died. She asked what I thought about the matter of her own money. If she came to have any from work, she'd do herself. She asked whether I drank. I answered everything straight. She told me she'd want her own bookshelf. She told me she'd want to keep accounts for the ranch and be treated as someone whose arithmetic was accurate, which it would be. She told me the Freckles were her own business, and she'd hear no commentary on them from a man who wanted to share her life. Have I commented? I said. She looked at me. No. Then we're agreed. She looked down at her hands a moment. When she looked back up, something had shifted in her face. Not soft, exactly. More like she'd made up her mind about something she'd been turning over for a while. You're not what I expected either, she said. No. Most men who come to the agency want a woman who will be grateful, she said. Grateful and quiet and not too much trouble. You don't seem to want that. I had a good marriage, I said. I know what that feels like. It's got nothing to do with grateful. She was quiet a minute. All right, she said. Let's see then. A month. We rode out to the ranch twice. She walked the fence lines with me in a way that told me she'd walked fence lines before. She took the ledger books out of the bureau drawer where I'd let them go to rot since Clara died and had them sorted in a week. And when she showed me what she'd found, 3 invoices paid twice, a timber account I'd forgotten about, a pattern in the hay prices that was costing me. I stood there looking at the numbers, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Useful, like a man who had the right partner. This is 3 years of slipping, she said. Nothing that can't be fixed. I know, I said, thank you. She handed the ledger back. Our fingers touched on the cover, her hand still in its cotton-work glove, mine bare, and she didn't pull away right off. Just let it sit there a moment. Then she set the book down on the table. That was Nora. We married on a Tuesday in October. Reverend Slot, the parlor at Mrs. Flood's, Dunk Pruitt as witness, because he would have been insufferable if we hadn't included him. Nora wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself, and I didn't say anything about the hem being slightly off level on one side because she already knew and she didn't care, and she was the most striking thing I'd seen in years. Harlan Voss was at the dry goods that afternoon when we came in for supplies. He saw us come through the door together, and I watched something move across his face. Not embarrassment, exactly. More like the look a man gets when he's realized he miscalculated, and he can't say so, and it costs him something to stand there knowing it. Nora bought flour and cornmeal and a small jar of honey, and she paid with her own money, which she still kept separate as we'd agreed. She didn't look at Harlan Voss. She didn't need to. In the wagon on the way home she said, "He was watching." "I know." "Good," she said. That was the whole conversation. Winter came fast that year. The first snow in November, a real one, the kind that comes in the night and by morning you don't recognize the land. I was up before light to check the stock, and when I came back in, she had the stove going and coffee on, and she was sitting at the table in the lamplight with her account book, and she had a blanket pulled around her shoulders and her hair down, not yet pinned for the day, and the lamplight was doing something to the freckles across her nose and cheeks. I stood in the doorway and I looked at her and I thought, Harlan Voss is a fool. He is an absolute fool, and I am a lucky man. She looked up and caught me. "Your coffee's going cold," she said. "Let it," I said. She looked at me a moment, and then she put her pen down and she looked at me with those gray eyes, and there was something in them that I hadn't seen before. Not new, exactly. More like something that had been building slow and quiet and was now simply there in the open, plain as the snow outside. She pushed her chair back and stood and came to me. She put her hand flat on my chest, over the coat I hadn't taken off yet, still cold from outside. She looked up at my face and she said, quiet, "You're a good man, Hale Morrow. You know that." I didn't answer. I couldn't have trusted what came out. She took her hand from my chest and she reached up and she put it against my jaw, her palm rough from work, still warm. "You see me," she said. "You've seen me from the start. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing." I put my hand over hers, held it there. Then I turned my head and I kissed the inside of her wrist, where the freckles ran up past the sleeve. She made a small sound, not much, and her fingers tightened a little against my face. 31 freckles on your left hand," I said. "I counted." "That's not even close to accurate," she said. "I've got time. We had a good life. I want to say that plainly and not dress it up. There were hard years. There are always hard years, on a ranch, in a marriage, on this earth. A drought season, a bad calf pull that nearly killed the cow, a disagreement about the north pasture lease that we did not speak of calmly. She lost a child early, before he had a chance, and that was a grief we carried together, and I won't go into it here except to say that she let me carry it with her, which she didn't have to do, and I've never forgotten that. But mostly it was good. She ran the accounts and I ran the cattle, and we argued about books she was reading, and sometimes I'd wake up in the night and she'd be awake already, sitting up in the dark working out some calculation in her head, and I'd say nothing, just put my hand on her back, and she'd settle. Dunk Pruitt used to say, and he said it more than once, which is Dunk's way, that I'd gotten the best of the deal, that the agency should have charged me more. I told him he wasn't wrong. What I didn't tell him, because it wasn't his business and some things aren't stories you hand around, was that what I'd gotten wasn't a deal at all. It was a stroke of plain, undeserved luck. 2 men looked at Nora Pell and saw a mark against her. I looked at her and saw a woman I could spend my life trying to be worth. Turns out she decided something similar about me. The year she turned 40, she let me count. We'd been married 9 years by then, and she'd long since stopped being self-conscious about anything I thought it had taken her time to stop being self-conscious about. And one evening in late spring, when the windows were open and the air smelled like the first cutting of hay, she looked over at me and said, "All right." I said, "All right what?" "You said you had time," she said, To count. I put down what I was reading. I kissed the 31 on her left hand. I kissed the ones along her forearm and the ones on her neck and the ones across her nose and cheeks, one at a time, and she held very still the way she never otherwise held still, and the evening light was coming through the window and the hay smell was everywhere. I didn't count, I never had, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd found a woman who'd been looked at wrong her whole life, and she'd found a man who'd looked at her right, and she'd chosen me for it. Not out of gratitude, not because I was the last one standing, because she'd looked me over with those clear gray eyes and made a deliberate decision, the same way she did everything, and the decision was me. I have not taken that lightly, not for a single day. Somewhere Harlan Voss is getting old on his south pasture. I don't know how that's going for him. I don't much think about it. I've got other things to consider.